Imagine a wound cut into the face of a whole world, a long dark slash opening across the rust-red curve of a distant planet, so vast that if you could float above it in the cold and the quiet, you would not be able to take it all in with a single glance. The land around it glows the soft colour of old terracotta, of dried clay and faded brick, lit by a sun that hangs smaller and paler in the sky than the one you know. And running through that gentle red expanse, mile upon mile upon mile, there is a shadowed canyon so deep and so wide that the morning light spills only slowly down its walls, pooling first along the eastern cliffs while the western depths still rest in blue and violet dusk. It is silent there, utterly silent, the way only a place with almost no air can be, and into that silence the dawn arrives without a sound, touching the rim of a chasm that has waited, unchanging, for longer than there have been eyes to see it. This great scar in the skin of Mars has a name, and tonight you can let it become the slow, dark river along which your thoughts drift down towards sleep. It is called Valles Marineris, the Mariner Valleys, and it is the largest canyon known anywhere in the solar system. There is nothing here for you to memorize, nothing to grasp, nothing to keep, nothing to recite when the light returns in the morning. You do not need to remember a single fact of all that drifts past you in the dark. Let each idea arrive the way the dawn arrives on that distant rim, slowly and without urgency, having crossed an enormous emptiness to reach you, asking nothing in return. Some of these wonders will settle quietly somewhere beneath your thoughts and remain there, and the rest will simply pass on through and dissolve, the way a thin morning haze burns gently away, and that is perfectly well. Let your breath grow long and unhurried. Let your shoulders sink. Let your jaw soften. Let the small busy machinery of the day wind slowly down into stillness. You're here only to drift along the edge of a great quiet canyon on another world, and to let its long patient story carry you gently down into rest. So begin where the eye itself would begin, at the very rim, looking out across a gulf so wide that the far side is only a low, uncertain line lost in distance and haze. The first thing to know about this canyon is simply how impossibly large it is, for Valles Marineris stretches more than 4,000 kilometers from one end to the other. That is a distance so great it is difficult for the mind to truly hold. Set down upon the earth, this single canyon would reach across the entire breadth of a continent, running from one coast all the way to the other, from a city on the western shore to the far edge of the eastern sea. It would swallow whole nations within its length. No canyon, no valley, no rift on the earth comes anywhere close to such a span. To walk its full length on foot, were such a thing even possible, would take a person the better part of a year of steady walking day after day, with the same red cliffs always rising on either hand. And all of this lies upon a world smaller than our own, so that this one canyon reaches across nearly a quarter of the entire planet's circumference, a single feature long enough to wrap a fifth of the way around the globe that holds it. The name it carries is a small fossil of human history, a memory of the small machine that first revealed it. Valles Marineris means, in the old language of scholars, simply the Mariner Valleys, and it was named in honour of a spacecraft called Mariner 9, the first machine ever to circle another planet. That small, faithful orbiter reached Mars at the close of the year 1971, slipping into its long loop around the red world, and among the wonders its cameras sent home across the dark was this colossal canyon, glimpsed for the first time in human history. So the canyon's very name is a small tribute, written into the maps of another world, to the curiosity that carried our eyes there. To say the name softly is to remember that everything we know of this place was gathered by delicate instruments flung across an enormous gulf, sending their faint pictures home through the silence. When that little orbiter first arrived, however, it found the entire planet hidden, wrapped from pole to pole in a veil of its own dust. A great storm had risen across the whole of Mars in those weeks, lifting fine red dust high into the thin air, until the whole globe was smothered in a featureless haze, and the cameras, peering down, could see almost nothing at all but a blank and dusty sphere. For weeks the watchers back on Earth waited, anxious and unsure while the storm settled, and as the dust at last began to clear, the highest features of the planet emerged first from the fading haze, the dark summits of giant volcanoes pushing up through the thinning veil, and then sliding into view, the long shadowed line of this immense canyon, revealing itself by degrees as the air grew clear. It was as though the planet had drawn a slow breath and then let it go, unveiling its greatest secret only once the dust had fallen still. To grasp the true scale of what was unveiled, set it beside the grandest canyon of our own world. The Grand Canyon of Arizona is by any earthly measure an enormous thing, a gorge that humbles every traveller who stands upon its rim, and yet Valles Marineris is some 5 times wider, several times deeper, and more than 10 times longer than that earthly wonder. Where the Grand Canyon runs a few hundred kilometres, this Martian chasm runs thousands. Where our canyon descends a single kilometre or so into the rock, this one plunges many kilometres down into the crust of Mars. The whole of the Grand Canyon, with all its vastness, could be tucked into one small side branch of Valles Marineris, and very nearly disappear there, a minor wrinkle in the wall of something incomparably greater. The width of this canyon is as staggering as its length, for in its broadest reaches Valles Marineris opens to some 200 kilometres across, and in places considerably more. Picture standing at the edge of such a gulf. The far wall would not merely be distant. It would lie entirely beyond the horizon, hidden by the gentle curve of the planet itself, so that from one rim you simply could not see the other. You would gaze out across the chasm and see only a vast emptiness of air falling away, the floor far below half lost in haze and shadow, and where the opposite cliff should be, there would be only empty sky meeting the dim, distant line of the floor. And the depth of it is deeper still than the imagination easily reaches, for in its lowest places the floor of Valles Marineris lies as much as 7 kilometres below the surrounding plains, and in certain deep troughs even more, dropping perhaps 10 or 11 kilometres down from the high plateau above. To stand at the bottom and look up would be to crane your neck toward walls that climb higher above you than the greatest mountains of the earth rise above the sea. The cliffs would tower so far overhead that their upper reaches would seem to lean against the sky, a wall of red rock rising kilometre after kilometre until it met the pale and dusty heavens. There is something almost dreamlike in a depth like that, a hollow carved so far into a world that whole mountain ranges could be lowered into it and vanish. Because it is so deep, the air itself behaves differently down at the bottom of this canyon than it does upon the plains above. The atmosphere of Mars is thin everywhere, far thinner than the air you're breathing now, but air, like water, grows denser the lower one descends, settling and thickening toward the bottom of any great hollow. And so, far down on the floor of Valles Marineris, the thin Martian air presses a little more heavily than it does on the heights above, gathered into the deep trough the way mist gathers in a valley at dusk. Of all the dry land on Mars, these canyon floors hold some of the densest air the planet has to offer, a faint extra thickness pooled into the deepest places as though the world were quietly hoarding what little breath it has in the lowest hollows of its greatest wound. That difference between the high rim and the deep floor is so great that, in a single place, the canyon spans nearly the entire range of heights that the whole rest of the planet contains. From the loftiest plateau along its edge to the lowest point upon its floor, Valles Marineris reaches down through a vertical gulf that, on Earth, would stretch from a high mountain summit all the way down past the deepest valleys. Within this one feature, then, the planet displays nearly its full vertical sweep, every layer of its outer crust laid open at once between the bright rim catching the higher sun and the shadowed floor where the dawn arrives last. It is, in a sense, a single cut deep enough to show a world to itself. This great canyon does not wander at random across the planet, but lies stretched along the equator of Mars, draped like a long belt across the middle of the world, just south of the line where day and night divide most evenly through the year. To the west of it rises a swollen highland, an immense bulge in the crust of the planet crowned with the largest volcanoes known anywhere, and the canyon reaches eastward away from that high ground like a crack spreading out from the edge of something pressing up beneath. Its placement is no accident, as you will come to feel, for the canyon and that great rising highland are bound together in a single long story, the one the consequence of the other, a tearing of the crust beside a swelling of it. And so the canyon truly begins not as a thing carved by any river, but as a tearing, a place where the very crust of a world was pulled apart. To the west, over an immense span of time, the planet's surface heaved upward into that great dome of highland and volcano, and as it rose, the crust around it stretched and strained and finally split, cracking open along its length the way the skin of a drying fruit splits as it shrinks, or the way mud cracks into long fissures as it dries beneath the sun. The deepest, longest of those cracks became Valles Marineris, a rift where the planet's stony shell was drawn apart and dropped down between great parallel faults. This is the gentlest and most important secret of the place. It was not patiently scooped out by flowing water over the ages, as our own canyons mostly were, but opened all at once, in the geological sense, as a wound in a straining crust. The water, where it came at all, came later, to widen and sculpt what the breaking of the world had already begun. That great rising of the western highland which split the crust has a name as well, and it is the true author of this canyon. Geologists call it the Tharsis Bulge, an enormous welt upon the face of Mars, a region of the crust that swelled upward over billions of years as molten rock pushed against it from below and piled great volcanoes upon its surface. So immense is this bulge that its sheer weight and its gradual rising warped the entire planet, raising one whole region high above the rest and straining the crust for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Valles Marineris is, in the end, one of the great stretch marks of that swelling, a crack opened in the strained shell of a world by the unhurried heaving of the land to its west. To understand the canyon is to understand that it is the signature of a planet that once rose unevenly, lifting a great shoulder of stone and tearing itself in the lifting. The age of all this is humbling to hold in the mind, for the breaking that began this canyon happened in the deep antiquity of the planet, billions of years ago. The crust is thought to have first split along these lines, something like 3.5 billion years in the past, in an age when Mars was younger and warmer and far more restless than the quiet, frozen world it is today. Since then, across spans of time that dwarf the whole history of life on Earth, the canyon has been widening and slumping and weathering, its walls collapsing inward, its floor gathering the debris of ages. So the chasm you are drifting along tonight is not a young thing at all, but an ancient one. A scar that has lain open on the face of another world since long before the first complex creatures stirred in the seas of our own. For all that we speak of it as a single canyon, Valles Marineris is in truth not one chasm, but many, a whole connected system of great troughs running side by side and end to end, like a braid of separate rivers all woven into one mighty channel. There are something like a dozen major troughs in all, each with its own name and its own character, some running parallel like the strands of a rope, others linking together into a single deep corridor. To fly its length would be to pass from one great hollow into the next, the walls drawing close and then opening wide, the floor dropping and rising, troughs merging and dividing, the whole forming not a simple ditch, but an intricate branching labyrinth of canyons stitched together across thousands of kilometers of red and silent land. At the western end, where the canyon system begins near the foot of that great swollen highland, the ground dissolves into one of the strangest and most beautiful tangles of terrain on all of Mars. Here the crust is broken into a maze of intersecting valleys and flat-topped blocks, a great cracked plateau split in every direction at once into a bewildering network of steep-walled troughs. It is called Noctis Labyrinthus, the labyrinth of the night, and the name suits it perfectly, for from above it looks like nothing so much as an enormous puzzle of canyons, a fractured tableland carved into countless mazes and gorges where the crust first began to pull itself apart. From this shadowed maze, the great canyons of Valles Marineris reach away to the east, as though the whole vast system were unspooling outward from this single, tangled knot of broken ground. Eastward from that labyrinth, the system opens into a sequence of immense individual chasms, each one a wonder in its own right, strung one after another along the equator like dark jewels on a thread. There are the long parallel troughs of the western reaches, and then the system swells outward into its broadest and deepest heart, where three great chasms open side by side into a single enormous basin. Each of these troughs bears its own old-sounding name, drawn from old myth and old geography, and together they form the central body of the canyon, the place where it is widest and deepest and most overwhelming, a region so vast that a single one of these troughs alone would dwarf any canyon on the earth. In that central heart of the system lies the deepest place of all, the very floor of the whole canyon, sunk lower than any other point along its thousands of kilometers. Here, where the great central chasm called Melas opens to its fullest width, the floor falls away to the lowest depths Valles Marineris reaches anywhere, a place where one would stand farther below the surrounding plains than at any other spot in the entire system. To descend to that point would be to reach the very bottom of the largest canyon in the solar system, the single deepest hollow of a chasm that is itself the deepest and widest known to exist. There is a deep finality in the thought of such a place, the lowest floor of the greatest canyon on a world where everything is already vast beyond easy grasp. And not every trough in this great system flows together with the others, for one of them stands strangely alone, a deep chasm entirely closed off on every side. It is called Valles Chasma, and unlike its neighbours it connects to no other canyon at all, opening to nothing, draining to nowhere, a deep enclosed pit sunk into the high plateau with sheer walls ringing it completely round. Within this sealed hollow rises a great mound of layered rock from the canyon floor, an island of old deposits standing isolated in the depths, surrounded by cliffs on every hand. There is something deeply still and secret about such a place, a chasm that holds itself apart from all the rest, a closed room in the architecture of the canyon, keeping its own quiet counsel in the silence of the high red desert. Among the western troughs that run side by side there is one named Valles Chasma, a deep and elongated gorge stretched along the southern edge of the system, its floor scored with long ridges running the length of it. Beside it lies its companion Tithonium Chasma, the two of them running side by side like a pair of immense parallel furrows ploughed into the high plateau, divided by a long narrow ridge of rock left standing between them. To gaze along these paired troughs is to see the canyon at its most orderly and linear, two great straight gashes drawn across the land, their walls rising sheer on either hand, their floors stretching away toward the horizon in long unbroken lines. They speak plainly of the faulting that opened the whole system, the crust dropping down in long parallel strips between the cracks, leaving these straight deep furrows as the clearest signature of the tearing that made the canyon. Toward the eastern half of the system stretches the single longest trough of them all, a great canyon named Noctis Chasma that runs on and on for far more than 1,000 kilometers in one continuous reach. This one trough alone, a mere portion of the whole great system, is by itself longer than any canyon found anywhere upon the earth, a single straight gorge that would span entire countries of our own world. Its walls climb steeply on either side, its floor runs deep and long beneath them, and along its length lie the tumbled remains of ancient landslides and the dark drifts of wind-blown sand. To travel the length of Coprates alone would be a journey of many days, and yet it is only one strand in the braid of Valles Marineris, a reminder that even the individual troughs of this system are each a wonder that would be famous beyond all others were it set down upon our own world. In the central chasms of Candor and Ophir, great mounds of pale layered rock rise from the canyon floor, mountains of fine sediment built up bed upon bed within the depths of the troughs. These interior mounds are among the most beautiful and puzzling features of the whole canyon. Vast piles of stratified material standing isolated within the chasms, their flanks ruled with countless delicate layers, their pale tones shining against the darker floor. Something laid them down across the ages, layer upon careful layer, perhaps dust gathered by the wind, perhaps sediment settled out of standing water, perhaps salts left behind as ancient lakes dried away, and now they stand as great striped monuments within the troughs. To gaze upon such a mound is to see the deep patience of the canyon made visible, a mountain built grain by grain across spans of time too vast to feel, rising silent and layered from the deep red floor. As the gaze drifts down from the rim toward the floor, the great walls themselves begin to tell their story, for they have not stood perfectly firm across the billions of years, but have crumbled and collapsed in slow, titanic ruin. Down the length of Valles Marineris, again and again, enormous sections of the cliff walls have given way and slid down onto the canyon floor in landslides of almost unimaginable size. These were no mere rockfalls, but collapses on a planetary scale, great slabs of the wall breaking loose and rushing down and outward across the floor, spreading debris for tens or even hundreds of kilometers from the foot of the cliffs. The scars of these great slides are written plainly across the canyon today, immense fans and tongues of jumbled rock fanning out upon the floor, the frozen wreckage of moments when whole mountainsides came thundering down in the thin and silent air. The sheer reach of those great landslides is a wonder in itself, for some of them carried their debris astonishing distances out across the canyon floor, farther than such collapses seem able to travel by any simple reckoning. A great mass of fallen rock, you might think, would tumble a little way from the cliff and then come to rest, and yet here the debris of these slides runs out across the trough for distances so great that geologists have long puzzled over how the rock could have flowed so far. Some have wondered whether hidden ice or trapped water or a cushion of the very air lubricated the moving rock and let it race outward like a flood, and the question lingers still, a soft mystery resting in the long reach of the rubble. Whatever the cause, the result is a canyon floor strewn in places with the spreading remains of collapses so vast they would have shaken the whole region had there been anyone there to feel them. When you look closely at the walls that remain standing, you find that they are not blank cliffs of uniform stone but are ruled, from top to bottom, with countless fine horizontal layers, like the pages of an immense book seen edge on. These layers are the stacked record of the planet's long history, bed upon bed of rock laid down over enormous spans of time, lava flows and wind-blown dust and old sediments piled one atop another and then sliced open by the tearing of the canyon. To gaze upon such a wall is to look directly into deep time, to see exposed in a single cliff face the uncounted accumulation of ages that would otherwise lie buried and hidden beneath the surface. The canyon, in cutting so deep, has laid open the very autobiography of Mars, every layer a chapter, the whole stacked history of a world rendered legible in the banded stone of its walls. What makes these interior layered deposits so beguiling is not merely that they exist, but that their layering is so astonishingly regular. Hundreds of beds of nearly even thickness stacked one upon the next, as though something had ticked off the ages at a steady beat. Each thin layer is thought to mark a single turn of some vanished cycle, a swing of climate or a season of dust or a rise and fall of water, repeated over and over with a rhythm so even that the whole mound becomes a kind of clock, its strata the slow ticking of a Martian metronome counting out epoch after epoch. Stranger still, these mounds do not fill the troughs from wall to wall, as a simple flooding might leave them, but stand apart upon the floor, islands of bedded rock rising hundreds or thousands of meters with open ground around them, and how they came to stand alone, half buried and then half stripped away again, is a riddle the canyon has not yet given up. To read their even bands is to sense time itself laid down in countable increments, a deep and rhythmic accounting of ages no eye was there to number, and woven through those layered rocks spread across the floor and flanks of the canyon lie minerals that whisper of water, the chemical fingerprints of a wetter and gentler age. Across great stretches of Valles Marineris, orbiting eyes have found deposits of sulfate minerals, salts of the kind that form when water-rich and dissolved substances evaporates away, leaving its mineral burden behind. There are pale beds of gypsum, the same soft mineral that forms in drying lakes and lagoons on the Earth, and other sulfates besides, kieserite and more, all of them bearing the signature of vanished water. To find such minerals strewn through the canyon is to read, in the very rock, the memory of liquid water that once lay or flowed within these depths, water long since gone, its passage recorded forever in the salts it left drying upon the canyon floor. These water-bearing minerals are not confined to some small corner of the canyon, but spread across an enormous area within it, covering thousands upon thousands of square kilometers of the canyon's floors and layered mounds. So vast is the reach of these altered rocks that they speak not of some brief or local wetting, but of water acting upon this place on a grand scale, across great spans of the canyon and great spans of time. Whole regions of the floor are touched with the chemistry of ancient water, the rocks subtly changed by long contact with liquid, their original minerals transformed into new ones that could only have formed in water's presence. The canyon, in this way, holds within its stone a sprawling, deep-buried record of a Mars that was once far wetter than the frozen desert it has become. Among those water-touched minerals there gleams, in places, a particular iron-rich mineral whose very presence is a quiet signpost to liquid water. Scattered through parts of the canyon lies grey hematite, a form of iron oxide that, on the Earth, very often forms in the presence of water, gathering in wet places, settling out of mineral-laden fluids. To find it within Valles Marineris is to find another thread in the same tapestry, another sign that water once worked steadily upon these rocks. Iron, water, and time together wrote this mineral into the canyon's floor, and it rests there still, a faint metallic memory of an age when liquid moved through this place and painted the chemistry of the stone. Alongside the salts and the iron minerals, in certain layers of the canyon's walls and floor, lie clays as well. The soft, fine minerals that form when rock is bathed in water over long ages and weathered into something new. Clays are, in their quiet way, among the most eloquent of all the water signs, for they form most readily where water lingers gently and long, neither too acidic nor too brief, working upon the rock across great spans of time. Their presence within Valles Marineris adds yet another voice to the chorus, telling of conditions that were once not merely wet but perhaps mild and enduring, the kind of long lingering wetting in which, on our own world, the very beginnings of life are sometimes thought to stir. The canyon holds these clays in its layered stone, a soft sediment of vanished water and vanished warmth. The way all these minerals were found is itself a quiet marvel, for they were read not by any hand touching the rock, but by instruments far overhead, sensing the colours of light the stone gives back. Every mineral reflects sunlight in its own particular way, drinking in certain colours and returning others, so that the light bouncing off the canyon floor carries a faint signature of whatever lies there, a fingerprint written in colour too subtle for the eye to see. Spacecraft circling Mars carry instruments that spread this reflected light into its many shades, and read those signatures from on high, mapping the gypsum here, the iron mineral there, the clays in another place, all without ever descending to the surface. So the whole mineral story of the canyon, the salts and the clays and the iron, was gathered from orbit by the steady reading of the light, the rocks quietly confessing their nature to instruments drifting far above them in the thin and silent sky. It is worth resting, too, in the simple fact that so much of what we know of this canyon points the same way, toward water, again and again, from every separate sign. The salts that form by evaporation, the iron mineral that gathers in wet places, the clays that need long gentle soaking, the layered mounds that may have settled through standing lakes, the channels carved by ancient floods, the ice still buried in the floor, all of these point, each in its own voice, toward a Mars that once held water in this great trough. No single sign would prove it beyond doubt, but together they weave a picture too consistent to dismiss, a chorus of quiet evidence all telling the same unbroken story. The canyon, read closely, remembers water in a dozen different ways at once, and there is something deeply reassuring in that convergence, the sense of a truth approached gently from many directions until it stands clear. Taken all together, these layered deposits and water-formed minerals tell of a time when standing water may have gathered within the canyon itself, when great lakes perhaps lay pooled upon its floor. Imagine, for a quiet moment, those deep troughs not dry and dusty as they are now, but partly filled with water, calm lakes lying in the shadow of the towering walls, their surfaces catching the small pale sun, sediment settling slowly through their depths to build the very layers we now see standing as mounds. Whether such lakes truly fill these chasms and for how long remains a gentle question, but the rocks themselves seem to remember water lying still within the canyon, depositing its patient layers, season upon season, in an age when Mars could hold liquid water open beneath its sky. In our own time, the canyon still keeps a secret store of water, though hidden now and frozen, buried within the soil of its deepest reaches. Spacecraft that can sense the hydrogen locked in the ground have peered down into the heart of Valles Marineris and found, beneath the surface in one great region, a remarkable abundance of water bound up in the soil. In a place near the centre of the canyon, the uppermost layer of the ground appears to hold a great deal of water mixed through it, far more than the dry plains around, as though a hidden reservoir of ice or water-rich soil lay buried just beneath the surface of the floor. The water is not visible, not lying open to the sky, but tucked away within the regolith, a quiet, frozen memory of wetness sheltered in the depths of the chasm. So rich is that buried water in one part of the canyon's heart that, in places, a large fraction of the very soil appears to be water by weight, locked within or beneath the ground. The region where this hidden water gathers most thickly is itself enormous, spanning an area as large as a small country, a great patch of the canyon floor beneath which water hides in surprising quantity. To stand there, you would see only dry red ground, dust and stone and shadow, with no hint of the frozen abundance sheltering below. And yet the instruments are confident. Down beneath that arid surface, in the deep equatorial heart of this immense Martian trough, water waits in the dark, hidden but present, a buried promise in the soil of a world long thought to be dry. There is a deep and gentle wonder in that, for water at the equator of Mars is a precious and surprising thing. Across most of the planet, any water near the surface survives only at the frozen poles or hidden deep underground, for the equatorial regions are too warm and too exposed for ice to linger openly. And yet here, in the depths of this great canyon astride the very equator, water seems to have found a place to remain, sheltered perhaps by the depth of the chasm or by some quiet circumstance of the soil. It is as though the canyon, in carving so deep into the world, also carved out a refuge, a hidden hollow where the planet could keep a little of its water safe through the long ages of drought. And as that thought settles softly over you, you may notice your own breath has slowed, your body grown a little heavier against the bed, sinking gently the way water sinks and gathers in the lowest, quietest places. The eastern end of the canyon tells a different story still, for there the great troughs do not simply end but open outward into a wide region scarred by the unmistakable marks of ancient floods. Where Valles Marineris reaches its eastern terminus, the canyon floor gives way to a tangled, broken landscape and to long channels that run away to the north, channels carved, it seems, by water in tremendous quantity, water that once burst from the ground and rushed away across the land. These are the outflow channels, great riverbeds dry now for billions of years, and they speak of floods on a scale almost beyond comprehension, torrents of water that poured out of the canyon region and raced northward in a single catastrophic deluge, carving the land as they went. Those floods drained at the last into a great low basin far to the north, a vast plain into which all that rushing water once emptied. The channels that begin near the canyon's eastern end run downhill across the land for great distances, and finally spread out into a broad northern lowland, a basin that some believe may once have held a sea, or at least a great temporary lake gathered from the floodwaters. To trace those channels on a map is to follow the path of a vanished flood, from the broken ground at the canyon's mouth, across the long, dry riverbeds, and out at last into the great basin where the water came to rest. The canyon, in this way, was not only a wound but a source, a place from which water once poured out across a quarter of the planet. The ground at that eastern end where the floods began is broken into a strange and jumbled terrain that geologists call chaos, and the name is well chosen. Here the surface appears to have collapsed and broken apart into a confusion of tilted blocks and mesas and sunken hollows, as though the land had given way from beneath, the ground falling in upon itself in great fractured slabs. Such chaotic terrain is thought to form when water or ice locked beneath the surface is suddenly released, the support pulled out from under the land so that it slumps and shatters into this broken jumble. The chaos at the canyon's mouth may mark the very place where the great floods were born, where buried water broke free and rushed away, leaving the ground above to collapse into this tumbled wilderness of stone. To picture those vanished floods is to imagine a violence almost impossible to reconcile with the still, dry canyon of today, water rushing through these troughs in volumes greater than any river the earth has ever known. The outflow channels are so deep and so wide that the floods which carved them must have moved staggering quantities of water in a very short time, far more than the mightiest rivers of our own world carry, a deluge that would have filled the canyon and roared away across the plains in a matter of days or weeks. And then it was gone, drained away and frozen and lost to the air, leaving only the carved channels and the broken chaos and the silent troughs behind. The canyon today holds the memory of that flood the way a dry riverbed holds the memory of rain, its shape still telling of waters that have not flowed for an age. The clearest hint that lakes truly stood here lies in the shape of those central beds themselves, for in places they lie flat and level and even, laid down horizontally and then draped to follow the contours of the floor, the very signature that still water leaves as it lets its burden settle out across a quiet bottom. Sediment carried by wind or tumbling debris piles up unevenly in slopes and drifts, but sediment falling through standing water settles flat, building the smooth, ruled layers that geologists read in some of these troughs as the fingerprint of a vanished lake bed. And if such lakes did fill the chasms, they did not last, for as the air thinned and the cold deepened, the standing water could no longer hold, freezing into the ground or escaping at last into the sky, until the level beds it had laid down were left high and dry, the lake bed stranded as mounds upon a floor that has known no open water for an age. The flat, still layers remain, the water that drew them gone, a calm surface preserved in stone long after the calm surface of the lake had vanished into the thin and bitter air. Some of that ancient water may have risen into the canyon not as rain or river but from below, welling up out of the ground as spring seeping from the walls and floor. As the deep chasm cut down through the crust, it may have opened paths for groundwater hidden in the rock to escape, the water rising to the surface within the troughs, gathering into pools, depositing its minerals as it evaporated in the thin, dry air. In this gentle picture, the layered mounds and salt-rich beds of the canyon were fed not only from above but from beneath, fountains of buried water seeping quietly into the depths across long ages, building their mineral deposits drop by drop. There is something deeply soothing in that image, water rising from within the rock, welling up into the silent canyon, gathering and spreading and drying, leaving its faint mineral memory behind. In certain places upon the canyon floor, the ground is patterned into faint polygons, a fine network of cracks dividing the surface into many-sided cells, the soft signature of ice working within the soil. Such patterned ground forms where water ice in the soil freezes and thaws and contracts through the turning of the seasons, splitting the surface into these even geometric shapes, the same kind of patterned ground that ice carves into the cold soils of the earth. To find such patterns within Valles Marineris is to find one more sign of ice hidden in the ground, the surface divided into its many cells by the seasonal stirring of frozen water beneath. The canyon floor, seen closely, is etched in places with this soft geometry, a delicate honeycomb of cracks marking where ice lies waiting in the soil, another faint trace of water in this dry and silent place. Down upon the canyon floor today, where once there may have been water, there now lie great fields of sand and dust, sculpted by the thin wind into dunes and ripples. The Martian wind, faint though it is in that thin air, has had billions of years to work upon the loose material gathered on the canyon floor, herding it into long dunes, combing it into ripples, raising shifting fields of sand within the troughs. These dunes shift only very gradually, nudged grain by the faint pressure of the wind, but over the ages they migrate and reshape themselves, dark drifts of sand wandering over the canyon floor beneath the high red walls. They are among the few things in this still place that still gradually move, the slow breathing of the wind made visible in the wandering of the sand. Many of those drifting dunes are not the pale gold of earthly sand, but a deep and shadowed dark, built of fine grains of volcanic rock blown into the troughs and gathered upon the floor. Against the warm red of the canyon walls and the lighter tones of the layered mounds, these dark dunes stand out in striking contrast, long curving ribbons of near-black sand winding across the floor, their crests sharp, their slopes smooth, sculpted into graceful shapes by the steady push of the wind. They are the broken remnants of the planet's old volcanic fires, ground fine over ages and herded into the depth of the canyon, and they lend the floor a quiet beauty, the dark, sweeping curves of the dunes drawn delicately across the red expanse like brushstrokes upon a great red canvas. When the great whirlwinds of dust pass across the canyon floor, they leave behind them long dark tracks, faint trails where the spinning columns have lifted away the bright surface dust to reveal the darker ground beneath. Seen from far above, these tracks wander and loop and cross one another over the canyon floor in their countless thousands, a sprawling scribble of dark lines drawn by the passing whirlwinds, written and erased as the dust settles back and new winds rise. They are the faint and temporary signatures of the dust devils that wander the floor, a record of their silent passing etched briefly into the surface, and they remind us that even in so still a place there is a quiet, ceaseless motion, the dust forever lifted and laid down again by the soft stirring of the air. New tracks appear with the warmer hours when the whirlwinds rise, fresh dark lines laid across the floor, and old ones soften and fade as the settling dust draws its pale veil back over them, so that the pattern is forever being written and gently erased, never quite the same from one season to the next. To watch that slow rewriting from far above, the dark lines blooming and fading across the red floor across the turning of the months, is to see the canyon quietly redraw itself in dust, a wide and restless scribble endlessly composed and softly wiped away beneath the towering walls. The wind that shapes those dunes also carves the standing rock itself, sculpting the softer layers of the canyon into strange and graceful forms. Where beds of weaker material lie exposed, the endless faint scouring of wind-blown dust wears them away, etching long grooves and ridges into the stone, carving the rock into streamlined shapes that all point the way the wind has blown for ages. These wind-carved ridges, sharp and parallel, run across parts of the canyon floor like the grain in a great piece of weathered wood, the steady signature of a wind that has blown across this place for longer than the mind can hold. In the thin and gentle air, even so faint a wind, given enough time, becomes a sculptor, shaping the very stone of the canyon into the soft flowing lines of its own slow passing. For all that the canyon seems frozen and unchanging, Its great walls are still crumbling even now, shedding their stone grain by grain and slab by slab into the depths. The cliffs of Valles Marineris are not eternal, but are very gradually wearing back, undermined by the slow loosening of their rock, by the freezing and thawing of whatever ice hides within them, by the constant pull of gravity drawing every loosened stone downward. Material trickles and tumbles from the walls in a slow rain of debris, gathering in great sloping aprons at the foot of the cliffs, the canyon ever so gradually widening as its walls retreat. The chasm we see is a single still frame of an unimaginably slow motion, a wound that is, even in its ancient silence, still imperceptibly opening wider, age upon age, as the cliffs give themselves up to the floor. The walls of this canyon, where they stand sheer and tall, are among the most dramatic cliffs anywhere in the solar system, rising in places several kilometers in a single great drop. To stand at the foot of such a wall would be to gaze up at a face of red rock climbing higher above you than almost any cliff on the earth, a sheer rampart of layered stones soaring kilometre upon kilometre toward the pale sky. There are individual cliff faces within Valles Marineris that fall, top to bottom, a distance several times the height of the tallest sheer walls our own world can offer. The mind struggles to hold such a height of bare rock standing in a single drop, a wall so tall that its summit would seem to lean against the heavens, the layers of its stone receding upward into haze and distance until they faded against the sky. The thin air of the canyon means that those walls, however distant, would stand with an uncanny clarity, sharp against a sky of strange and gentle colour. On Mars, the sky is not the deep blue you know, but a soft butterscotch, a pale dusty tan or pinkish ochre, coloured by the fine red dust forever suspended in the thin air. Against that quiet, muted sky, the great cliffs would rise in stark relief, their every layer and ridge etched clean in the dust light, undimmed by the thick blue haze that softens distant mountains on the earth. A far wall of the canyon, were it close enough to see it all, would stand crisp and clear against the tan heavens, every detail of its banded stone laid bare in air too thin to blur it, a hard-edged vision of red rock beneath a sky the colour of weak tea. And in the strangest of reversals, the sky of Mars turns gentle blue not at midday but at the close of the day, around the setting of its small pale sun. While the daytime sky wears its dusty butterscotch hue, the fine dust scatters the sunset light in such a way that the glow around the sinking sun shifts toward a soft, cool blue, a pale azure bloom gathering low in the sky as evening falls upon the canyon. To watch the sun go down over the rim of Valles Marineris would be to see the reverse of every sunset you have known. The warm tones held high in the dusty sky, while a quiet blue glow pools around the vanishing sun, the canyon below sinking into shadow beneath a sunset painted in the gentlest of cool light. There is something deeply soothing in that thought, a sunset that ends not in fire but in a soft and tranquil blue, settling over a silent canyon at the close of the Martian day. Through the thin air of that canyon there moves, on certain cold mornings, a quiet drift of fog and cloud, water vapour gathering in the depths and along the heights. In the early hours, before the small sun has warmed the floor, thin mists can form within the troughs of Valles Marineris, faint veils of water-ice fog pooling in the low places and curling along the walls, just as morning fog gathers in the valleys of the earth. High above, delicate clouds of ice crystals drift across the sky, pale wisps catching the early light. These mists and clouds are thin and faint, far gentler than any fog you have walked through, but they are real, soft breaths of moisture stirring in the canyon's cold air, a reminder that even on so dry a world, water still moves quietly through the sky above this great chasm. The temperature within the canyon swings between gentle warmth and deep cold across the span of a single day, in a way that is strange and almost tender to imagine. Near the equator, in the brightest hours, the surface of Mars can warm to something almost mild, a temperature that, at your feet, might feel like a cool spring afternoon, while the thin air above remains bitterly cold. But when the small sun sets and the long night falls upon the canyon, the heat flees swiftly from the dry ground into the thin and empty sky, and the temperature plunges far below the deepest cold of any earthly winter. So a single day on the floor of Valles Marineris carries the ground from a near spring-like warmth at noon to a frozen, killing cold by night, the canyon breathing between mild day and bitter darkness, over and over across the silent ages. For all its great and intricate detail, this canyon is so enormous that it can be glimpsed even from the Earth, a faint dark marking on the small red disk of Mars seen through a telescope. Long before any spacecraft ever reached the planet, keen-eyed observers gazing through their lenses could trace faint dusky lines and patches upon the face of Mars, and among them, though they could not have known it, lay the shadow of this immense canyon. To the naked eye through a telescope, it is only a subtle dark smudge, a hint of shading on a tiny ruddy globe, and yet that faint mark is a chasm thousands of kilometers long. There is a real marvel in that a feature on another world should be so colossal as to be visible across the gulf of space as a smudge upon a distant point of light, a canyon large enough to be seen from another planet. Only when spacecraft arrived, however, did the true shape of the canyon emerge, mapped at last in exacting detail by a long succession of orbiting eyes. After that first little orbiter revealed its existence, others followed across the decades, each carrying finer cameras and sharper instruments, building up our picture of Valles Marineris layer by layer, image by image. Great orbiters mapped its topography, measured the heights of its walls and the depths of its floor, traced the chemistry of its rocks, and photographed its cliffs in such fine detail that individual boulders and dunes could be seen. From the blurred first glimpse through the clearing dust to the exquisite maps of today, the canyon has been gradually drawn into knowledge by a relay of machines, each one adding its careful observations to the long and growing portrait of the chasm. One of those orbiting instruments measured the canyon's depths and heights so precisely that it built a complete map of the shape of the land, a three-dimensional model of the entire chasm. By bouncing pulses of light off the surface far below and timing their return with great care, this instrument traced the rise and fall of the terrain across the whole planet, and so rendered Valles Marineris in exact relief, every trough and ridge and cliff measured to within a few meters of its true height. From that careful mapping, we know the canyon not merely as a picture, but as a precise sculpture, its depths and slopes and the towering reach of its walls all known with fine accuracy, the whole chasm captured as a faithful model of itself, floating in the memory of our machines. The sheer quantity of rock that is simply absent from the canyon, dropped down or carried away or never there at all, is almost beyond imagining, a hollow vast enough to hold an ocean. If the canyon could be filled to its brim with water, it would cradle a volume to rival some of the great seas of the earth. So immense is the empty space carved into the crust of Mars. To picture that emptiness is to feel the scale of the place from a new direction, not by the height of its walls or the length of its troughs, but by the sheer void within it, a hollow so deep and so broad that whole seas could lie within it and not overflow. The canyon is in this way a measure of absence as much as of stone, an emptiness shaped into the planet, grand enough that the mind reels softly to consider all that is simply not there. To truly grasp how this canyon compares to the rifts of our own world, you may set it beside the greatest crack in the Earth's crust, the long valley where Africa is tearing apart. On the Earth there is a place called the East African Rift, where the continent is splitting along a great line, the crust pulling apart and dropping down between faults to form a long chain of valleys and lakes. Valles Marineris is thought to have formed in a similar way, by the stretching and dropping of the crust along great parallel faults, and so this earthly rift is perhaps the closest cousin our own world can offer to the Martian canyon. And yet even this greatest of earthly rifts is dwarfed by Valles Marineris, shorter and shallower and narrower than its Martian counterpart. For the canyon on Mars is a tearing on a scale our living, restless planet has never managed to match. The same great swelling that tore open this canyon also raised, upon its broad shoulder, the largest volcano known anywhere in the solar system, a mountain so vast it would dwarf any peak on the Earth. To the west of the canyon, crowning the Tharsis Bulge, stand several immense volcanoes, and beyond them rises the greatest of any world we know, a mountain broad enough to cover a large country, and tall enough to climb far higher above the plains than any earthly summit reaches above the sea. The canyon and these giant volcanoes are kin, born of the same upheaval, the swelling that piled up the mountains being the very swelling that cracked the crust into the chasm. To hold the two together in the mind is to glimpse the strange grandeur of Mars, a world that built both the largest volcano and the largest canyon known to exist, set side by side upon a single hemisphere, the mountain and the wound, two children of one ancient rising. Where the great central chasms open side by side, the canyon ceases to be a set of separate troughs and becomes instead a single vast depression, a hollow far wider than any one of its parts. Here the walls that divide the parallel troughs fall away, and the chasms merge into one enormous basin, a continuous open expanse hundreds of kilometers across where the floor stretches wide beneath the distant walls. To stand within this merged heart of the canyon would be to feel almost as though one stood not in a canyon at all, but upon a wide sunken plain, the cliffs so far off on either side as to be lost beyond the horizon, the floor reaching away in every direction. It is the place where the canyon is most overwhelming, where its separate troughs join into a single immensity, the heart of the system opening into a hollow wide enough to swallow whole landscapes within its bounds. There is a deep reason why Mars could open so vast a wound while the Earth never has, and it lies in the very nature of the two worlds. The Earth's crust is broken into great moving plates that slide and grind and shift, forever relieving the strains that build within the planet, so that no single crack can ever grow too large before the moving plates carry it away or close it off. But Mars has no such moving plates, or lost them long ago, and its crust is a single rigid shell, unbroken and unmoving across the whole face of the world. And so, when the great Tharsis Bulge swelled and strained that motionless crust, the strain could not be relieved by shifting plates but had to be answered by a single enormous tearing, a crack that grew and grew unchecked across thousands of kilometers, becoming Valles Marineris. The canyon is, in a sense, a monument to a planet that could not move, a strain frozen into a still and rigid world. The lower gravity of Mars too played its quiet part in letting the canyon grow so deep and its walls climb so high. On a smaller world, gravity pulls less fiercely than it does on the Earth, and so cliffs can stand taller, slopes can rise steeper, and great heights of rock can hold themselves up that would slump and collapse under the heavier pull of our own world. The towering walls of Valles Marineris, kilometers of sheer stone standing in a single drop, are possible in part because the gentle gravity of Mars allows the rock to bear its own weight to such heights. On the Earth, such cliffs would crumble under their own mass, but on lighter Mars they endure, raising their layered ramparts toward the dusty sky, a canyon made grander still by the very weakness of the planet's pull. The shape of the canyon, with its great parallel walls and its dropped-down floor, is the classic form of a particular kind of rift, a structure geologists know well. When the crust of a world is pulled apart, a long central block often drops downward between two parallel faults, leaving a flat-floored valley sunk between steep walls on either side, a form called a graben. Valles Marineris, in its straighter reaches, is in essence an enormous graben, or a whole series of them side by side, the floor a great fallen block, and the walls the faces of the faults along which it dropped. To understand this is to see the canyon not as a random gash, but as a thing of order and structure. Its great parallel cliffs the very edges of the faults that let its floor sink down when the planet's crust was drawn apart, Hidden within the walls of the canyon, in places, lie the frozen traces of ancient fire, the marks of molten rock that once forced its way up through the splitting crust. As the planet tore itself open along these lines, magma from deep within sometimes rose into the cracks, freezing there into great sheets and dikes of dark volcanic rock now exposed in the canyon walls. These intrusions of old lava, laid bare by the cutting of the chasm, tie the canyon to the volcanic heart of the planet, for the same restless forces that raised the great Tharsis volcanoes also drove molten rock into the opening rift. The walls of Valles Marineris thus hold not only the layered record of sediment and dust, but also the dark veins of vanished fire, the frozen plumbing of a world that once burned and stirred beneath its surface. The canyon's deep connection to those great volcanoes to its west is written into its very position and its origin. The immense bulge of Tharsis, which split the crust to make the canyon, is crowned with the tallest volcanoes any planet is known to bear, mountains so high they dwarf every peak on the Earth, and the swelling that built those volcanoes is the same swelling that tore open Valles Marineris. The canyon and the volcanoes are two faces of a single ancient upheaval, the rising of a great volcanic dome and the tearing of the crust around it, bound together in one long chapter of the planet's youth. To look from the canyon toward those distant volcanic giants is to look from the wound to the very force that made it, the tearing and the swelling forever linked across the face of Mars. That tangled maze of broken ground at the canyon's western end, the labyrinth of the night, lies at the very junction between the canyon and the great volcanic bulge, the place where the tearing began. Here, at the eastern foot of the rising Tharsis highland, the crust was most fiercely strained, and so it cracked in every direction at once, shattering into the bewildering network of intersecting troughs that forms the labyrinth. From this fractured nexus, the great chasms stretch off toward the sunrise, as though the entire span of Valles Marineris unspooled outward from this single shattered knot, where the swelling of the land and the tearing of the crust met most violently. The labyrinth is, in a sense, the canyon's birthplace, the tangled wound at the heart of the strain, from which the long chasms flow. When you study the walls of the canyon closely, you find them carved everywhere with a fine pattern of ridges and gullies running straight down their faces, the signature of slow erosion working upon the cliffs. These spur and gully forms, as they are called, are sharp parallel ridges separated by narrow chutes, etched down the steep walls by the gradual trickling away of loosened material over the ages. They give the great cliffs a fluted, sculpted look, as though some great hand had drawn its fingers down the rock, and they speak of the slow, wearing back of the walls, the endless shedding of debris that very gradually widens the canyon and softens the faces of its cliffs. In the thin and frozen air with no rain to carve them, these forms grow by the merest degrees, the work of ages written down the length of every great wall. The slow crumbling of those walls is helped along, it seems, by ice hidden within the rock, freezing and thawing through the long Martian seasons. Water ice locked into the stone of the cliffs expands as it freezes and loosens its grip as it warms, and this endless quiet cycle, repeated across countless years, pries the rock apart grain by grain and slab by slab, weakening the walls and feeding the thin rain of debris into the canyon below. It is the same tireless force that crumbles cliffs on the Earth, the quiet wedging of freezing ice, working here in the thin cold air of Mars upon the walls of the greatest canyon in the solar system. The chasm widens, ever so slowly, by the soft and ceaseless labour of ice freezing and thawing in the depths of its old, cold stone. Across the floor and walls of the canyon, with the turning of the seasons, there comes and goes a delicate frost, a faint white touch upon the red rock in the coldest times. In the depths of the Martian winter, when the cold grows fierce even in these equatorial reaches, thin frosts of water ice and frozen carbon dioxide can gather upon the colder, shadowed surfaces of the canyon, dusting the rock with a faint pale rime that vanishes again as the season warms. These frosts are thin and fleeting, far gentler than the snows of the earth, but they bring a soft seasonal breath to the canyon, a quiet whitening and clearing of the rock as the long Martian year turns from cold to warm and back again. Even here, in this still and silent place, the seasons leave their faint and tender mark. The carbon dioxide that makes up most of the Martian air plays its own part in the canyon's slow life, freezing and thawing with the seasons in ways that water cannot. The air of Mars is almost entirely carbon dioxide, and in the coldest places and times, this gas itself can freeze directly onto the ground as a pale frost, then warm and turn back to vapour as the season shifts, never passing through a liquid form at all. This freezing and vanishing of the very air lends the canyon a strange and gentle rhythm, a seasonal breathing in which a part of the atmosphere settles onto the cold rock and then rises away again, the planet inhaling and exhaling its own thin breath across the turning of its long, slow year. Deep within the canyon, the interest of those who study Mars is drawn not only to its grandeur, but to a quiet and profound question: whether life might ever have stirred in such a place. Where there was once water and warmth and the gentle minerals that water leaves behind, there were once perhaps the conditions in which the smallest forms of life might have found a foothold. The layered deposits, the clays, the salts, the long-vanished lakes, all of these mark Valles Marineris as a place where the ancient ingredients of life may have gathered together in the deep past, and so the canyon becomes not only a wonder of scale, but a place of gentle hope, a chasm where, long ago, the spark of living things might conceivably have caught and flickered in the warm, dark water beneath the towering walls. Should any such ancient life ever have stirred here, the very rocks of the canyon might be the gentlest keepers of its memory, for certain minerals are remarkably good at preserving the faint traces of living things. The salts and fine sediments laid down by water can lock away the delicate remnants of life within their crystals and their layers, sheltering them through enormous spans of time, so that even now, billions of years later, such traces might still lie hidden within the layered beds of Valles Marineris. This is part of why those who search for signs of past life look so longingly towards such places, where water once gathered and minerals formed, for if life ever did flicker here, the silent stone may have quietly kept its record. There is a soft hopefulness in that thought. The canyon not only a possible cradle of early life, but a faithful keeper of its memory, holding whatever it once sheltered safe within the gentle pages of its rock. The hidden water still locked within the canyon's floor deepens that hope, for where there is water there is, at the least, one of the great requirements of life. The buried ice and water-rich soil sheltered in the depths of Valles Marineris mean that, even now, in the frozen present, this place holds one of the most precious of all resources, gathered and kept where the planet could so easily have lost it. Should life ever have taken hold in the early canyon, such hidden water might be a refuge still, a sheltered store where the simplest living things, if they exist at all, could endure the long cold. And should living explorers ever come, that same buried water would be a gift beyond price, a deep well in the desert of another world, waiting in the dark beneath the canyon floor. It is partly for this reason, and partly for its sheer grandeur, that some who dream of human journeys to Mars look upon Valles Marineris as a place where people might one day come and even stay. The canyon offers, in its depths, certain quiet gifts to any future traveller. The slightly thicker air pooled along its floor, the hidden water sheltered in its soil, the towering walls that might shield a settlement from the harsh radiation pouring down from space. To make a home in such a place would be to dwell at the bottom of the deepest, widest canyon known to exist, beneath cliffs kilometres high, in a sheltered equatorial trough where the planet keeps some of its warmth and its water and its shelter gathered together. The dream is distant and difficult, but the canyon, in its depths, holds out a quiet welcome to it. That shelter from radiation is no small thing, for the depth of the canyon itself would offer some protection beneath its towering walls. On the surface of Mars, with its thin air and no protecting magnetic shield, harmful radiation from the sun and from deep space falls more freely than it does upon the Earth, and any future explorers would need to shield themselves from it. But down in the deep troughs of Valles Marineris, with kilometres of cliff rising on either side and a little more air gathered overhead, the canyon floor would lie somewhat sheltered, the high walls blocking part of the sky and the deeper air absorbing a little more of what falls from above. The very depth that makes the canyon so dramatic would also make it, in its quiet way, a refuge, a deep place where the harshness of the open Martian surface is softened just a little by the sheltering walls. To imagine standing upon that canyon floor, gazing up at the walls and out across the vast trough, is to imagine one of the most breathtaking views in all the solar system. The cliffs would rise on either hand far higher than any earthly mountain, climbing kilometre upon kilometre into the pale tan sky, their layered faces glowing in the small sun's light. The floor would stretch away into the distance, wide and red and silent, the far wall lost in distance and dissolved into the red haze of the floor, dunes and fallen debris and layered mounds scattered across the immense expanse. To stand there would be to feel smaller than almost anywhere a person could stand, a single tiny figure at the bottom of a wound in a whole planet, surrounded by a grandeur and a silence beyond anything the Earth can offer. And there is a strange peace in that smallness, a quiet permission to feel how vast the worlds are, and how gently a single life may rest within them. A sunrise seen from within that canyon would be a thing of slow and unearthly beauty, the light arriving by gentle degrees down the towering walls. As the small sun lifted above the distant rim, its light would touch first the highest cliffs, gilding the topmost layers of rock in pale gold, while the depth still lay in cool blue shadow, and then it would creep downward, wall by wall, ledge by ledge, until at last it reached the floor far below. The dawn would not break all at once as it can on open ground, but would descend the canyon walls in a long, slow pouring of light, the shadows retreating downward, the red rock warming layer by layer until the whole trough lay open to the gentle day. To watch such a sunrise would be to watch light itself move down a cliff kilometres tall, an unhurried dawn fitting for so old and so deliberate a place. And as that dawn light filled the canyon, it would fall through an air so thin and clear that distant things would stand with an almost unreal sharpness, undimmed across great reaches of space. On the Earth, the thick and moist air softens everything far away, wrapping distant hills in blue haze, but in the thin, dry air of Mars there is little to blur the view, and so the canyon's features would stand crisp and clear across many kilometres, every distant cliff and dune etched fine against the tan sky. The view would have a strange, hard clarity, a sense of distance laid bare, far places looking nearer and sharper than the eye expects, the whole trough rendered in an unsoftened light that the misty air of our own world never allows. Above the canyon, in the thin Martian sky, there ride not one but two small moons, swift and faint, crossing the heavens in ways no earthly moon ever does. The larger of the two, a small dark lump of rock, circles so close and so fast that it races across the sky from west to east, rising and setting more than once in a single Martian day, a tiny hurried moon forever hastening overhead. The smaller and more distant one drifts the other way, taking its unhurried time to cross the sky. To stand in the canyon at night and watch these two little moons, one rushing and one drifting, would be to see a sky unlike any you have known, the heavens above the great chasm marked by the silent wandering of two small and ancient stones. The nearer of those moons hangs so low and so swiftly that, seen from the canyon, it would appear to hurry visibly across the sky, a small bright shape sliding noticeably against the stars within the span of an hour or two. It rises in the west and sets in the east, against the usual order of things, and crosses the whole sky so quickly that one might watch it travel a measurable distance in a single quiet evening, There is something almost companionable in so swift a little moon, a small near presence forever hurrying through the Martian night above the silent canyon, a tiny rushing light that would keep a kind of restless company to anyone gazing up from the depths. That swift little moon is, by tiny degrees, drawing closer to the planet with the passing of the ages, spiralling gently inward upon its hurried orbit. Across many millions of years it is being drawn nearer and nearer to Mars, its circling path tightening by a tiny amount with each passing century, so that in some far and distant future it will draw too close to hold itself together. When that day comes, the small moon may break apart under the pull of the planet, scattering into a ring of rubble that could one day circle Mars as a faint band of debris, a gentle ring above the Great Canyon. There is no haste in this, no drama for an age yet to come, only the slow certainty of it, a little moon drawing imperceptibly inward across spans of time too long to feel, carrying its quiet fate onward towards some far tomorrow above the silent red trough. Now and then, as that nearer moon hurries across the sky, it passes directly before the face of the small pale sun, casting a fleeting shadow that races across the canyon floor. The moon is too small to blot out the sun entirely as our own moon can, and so it does not bring true darkness, but only a brief partial dimming, a small dark shape sliding swiftly across the sun's disk and then gone, the whole passing over in mere moments. To stand in the canyon and witness such a transit would be to see the little moon traced for an instant as a dark bead against the sun, its shadow sweeping across the red floor and away, a small swift eclipse, unlike anything the Earth can offer, over almost before it has begun. These quick passings happen often in the Martian sky, the hurried moon forever crossing and recrossing the path of the sun, casting its small fleeting shadows down into the great chasm. The father moon, by contrast, moves so slowly across the sky that it would seem almost to hang nearly still, a faint and lonely point of light drifting gently against the stars. So distant and so unhurried is its motion that it takes long to cross the heavens, lingering in the sky far longer than its swift companion, a small far moon keeping its slow and steady watch. Between the two of them, the rushing near moon and the drifting far one, the night sky above Valles Marineris holds a strange and lovely pair, two small worlds of utterly different temper, one hastening and one barely moving, both shining faintly down upon the great dark trough below. Beyond those two little moons, the night sky above the canyon would blaze with stars in a clarity our own thick and glowing skies can rarely match. The thin air of Mars and the absence of bright cities would leave the heavens above the canyon deep and dark and crowded with stars, the same constellations you know glittering keen and clear in the cold dry night. To lie upon the floor of Valles Marineris and look up would be to see a sky of extraordinary depth, the stars hanging close and bright above the towering rim, the two small moons drifting and rushing among them, the whole canyon resting in silence beneath a wealth of distant light. There is a deep peace in imagining such a sky, the great dark trough open to the stars, the silence absolute, the night holding the canyon gently in its hand. So thin is the air above the canyon that the sky there fades toward the black of space far more quickly than it does on the Earth, the stars showing even when the small sun is not far gone. The atmosphere of Mars is so sparse that it scatters only a little light, and so the daytime sky, though tinted with dust, is darker than our own, and the stars return swiftly as the sun goes down. High above the canyon, the air thins away to almost nothing, and the deep black of space hangs close overhead, so that to stand in the great trough is to stand very nearly at the edge of the void, with only the faintest veil of air between the canyon floor and the endless dark beyond. It is a place poised at the very threshold of space, the thin sky barely holding back the stars. The whole canyon is so vast that no single view, from anywhere within it, could ever take in more than the smallest part of it at once. Stand where you might upon its floor or rim, you would see only the nearest reaches, a few troughs, a stretch of wall, a portion of the floor, before the curve of the planet and the sheer scale of the chasm hid the rest from your eyes. To see the whole of Valles Marineris at a single glance, you must rise far above it, out into space, until the entire planet shrinks small enough to hold the canyon in one view, the great dark slash running across the red globe from edge to edge. It is a feature built to a scale beyond the reach of any earthly horizon, a canyon so large that only from another world, or from the depths of space, can it be seen entire. To see it so from far above is to feel the strange and gentle smallness of all our own concerns, the canyon stretching across a quarter of a planet while a single human life is so brief and so slight beside it. There is no sorrow in that smallness, only a kind of quiet release, a sense that one may set down the weight of the day's worries beside a thing so vast and so old. The canyon was tearing open its slow length before there were any people to fret or hurry, and it will lie there still long after every present trouble has been forgotten, unchanged and untroubled beneath the small pale sun. To hold its scale in the mind for even a moment is to feel one's own cares grow light and far away, dwindling to their true and tiny size beside the great red silence of the chasm. And you may let your breathing settle into that same unhurried calm now, slow and deep and easy, nothing to grasp, nothing to keep, only the soft passing of one breath into the next. The canyon teaches, simply by being what it is, how slowly the great features of a world are made and unmade, across spans of time that dwarf all human reckoning. Valles Marineris was billions of years in its making, and will be billions more in its long unmaking, its walls crumbling grain by grain, its floor gathering debris, its shape shifting by amounts too small to see in any single lifetime, or in 1,000 lifetimes joined together. The canyon moves on a clock so vast and so unhurried that our whole history is but a single held breath within it, and there is a deep calm in that thought, a sense of belonging to a world that keeps such enormous and gentle time, a planet whose greatest wound opens and heals so slowly that to us it seems to stand forever still. There is a deep kinship, too, between this canyon and the deep places of our own world, for both were shaped by the same unhurried forces of a planet straining and tearing and wearing away. The rifts and canyons of the earth, the great valleys where continents split, the gorges where rivers cut down through stone, all were made by the same kinds of forces that opened Valles Marineris, stretching crust and flowing water and the slow pull of time. To gaze upon the Martian canyon is to see those familiar forces written across another world at a grander scale, the same story of a planet pulling apart and wearing down, told in red rock beneath a tan sky. The chasm is strange and distant, and yet it is also deeply familiar, kin to every valley and gorge on the earth, a fellow work of the old geology that shapes all rocky worlds alike. The canyon is also, in its way, a kind of great museum of the planet's history, its layered walls preserving a record that reaches back through nearly the whole life of Mars. In cutting so deep into the crust, Valles Marineris has laid open layer upon layer of ancient rock, each bed a page from a different age of the planet, the whole stacked sequence holding the story of how Mars formed and changed and cooled across billions of years. To read those walls layer by layer is to read the autobiography of a world, the rise of its volcanoes, the flow of its early waters, the slow settling of its dust, all recorded in the banded stone. The canyon keeps this great history open to the sky, a place where the deep past of a whole planet lies exposed and legible, waiting to be read by whoever comes with eyes to see. To hold the canyon's great age beside the story of our own world is to feel how very long it has endured. For the tearing that began, it took place around the same distant time when the very first life was stirring in the seas of the earth. While the simplest living things were just beginning to take hold upon our young planet, the crust of Mars was cracking open into this great chasm, and the canyon has lain there ever since, through all the long ages in which life on the earth crept from those first faint stirrings toward everything that now lives and breathes, The whole long story of life on our world, from its earliest beginnings to this very night, has unfolded across the same span of time that the canyon has rested open beneath the Martian sky. There is something quietly staggering in that. The thought that this single feature on another world is as old as life itself on ours. A chasm that has kept its silent watch through the entire history of living things on the Earth, and keeps it still tonight as you drift towards sleep. Among the most poignant chapters written in those walls is the long story of water on Mars, of a world that once ran with rivers and lay beneath open skies before the long cold claimed it. The clays and salts and water-formed minerals of the canyon, the channels carved by vanished floods, the layered beds that may have settled out of standing lakes, all tell of a Mars that once held liquid water open beneath its sky, rivers and lakes and perhaps even seas, in an age when the planet was warmer and its air was thicker. The canyon preserves the memory of that lost and gentler world, the record of water that flowed and pooled and vanished, a whole vanished climate written into the rock. To stand upon the dry canyon floor today is to stand within the memory of water, in a place that remembers, in its very stone, an age of rivers and rain now gone for billions of years. That vanished water did not disappear entirely, but was drawn away into the cold, frozen into the ground and the poles, lost to the thinning air, leaving the canyon dry. As Mars cooled and its air grew thin across the long ages, the liquid water that once flowed and pooled upon its surface could no longer remain, freezing into the soil and the polar caps, escaping bit by bit into space, until the rivers ran dry and the lakes vanished and the canyon was left to the dust and the silence. The water did not vanish so much as withdraw, retreating into hidden ice and frozen ground, sheltering in the deep cold places like the buried store within the canyon's floor. And so the chasm holds both the memory of water that flowed and the presence of water that remains, the lost rivers of the past and the hidden ice of the present, the whole long arc of a world's water gathered into a single great trough. The thinning of the air that left the canyon so dry was itself a slow loss spread across the ages, the planet gradually surrendering its atmosphere to the emptiness of space. Without the protecting magnetic shield it had lost in its youth, Mars lay open to the steady wind that streams forever outward from the sun, and across billions of years that ceaseless wind stripped away the upper reaches of the atmosphere, carrying it off into space a little at a time, until the once thicker air grew thin and cold. As the air thinned, it could no longer hold the warmth or the pressure that liquid water needs, and so the rivers and lakes and seas failed, and the canyon dried beneath an emptying sky. It is a gentle and unhurried story of loss, a world quietly breathing its atmosphere away into the dark across ages beyond all counting, the canyon falling silent and dry beneath a sky grown ever thinner with the ages. The very silence of the canyon is a wonder worth resting in, for it is a stillness almost beyond anything the earth can offer, a quiet held by air too thin to carry sound. In that sparse atmosphere, sound itself struggles to travel, growing faint and muffled in the thin air, so that even the fall of a great landslide or the rush of the wind would reach a listener only as a distant, softened whisper, if at all. The canyon rests in a hush so deep that it is nearly the silence of space itself, a vast trough where the loudest events unfold almost without a sound, where the wind sighs faintly and the dust settles quietly, and the great walls crumble grain by grain in a stillness that has lain unbroken for ages. To imagine standing in that silence is to feel a quiet so profound that it seems to settle into the very bones, a stillness in which the mind itself grows hushed and slow. What little sound does travel through that thin air would reach the ear strangely altered, softer and lower than the same sound would seem upon the earth. In so sparse and so cold an atmosphere, sound moves differently than it does in our own thick air, the higher tones fading away more quickly than the low, so that a voice or a footfall in the canyon would arrive muffled and deepened, its brightness lost, only the lower notes surviving the journey through the thin and chilly air. To speak in that great trough would be to hear one's own words returned faint and low and oddly hushed. the canyon swallowing the higher music of any sound, leaving only a soft and muted murmur. There is a strange gentleness even in that, a place where sound itself grows quiet and deep, where the very air softens every voice into something hushed and low and far away. To stand at the deepest point of the canyon, moreover, would be to stand lower than almost anywhere else upon the whole face of Mars, sunk farther below the planet's average level than nearly any other place a traveller could go. The floor of the deepest trough lies so far down that few spots on all the planet reach lower, a great hollow pressed deep into the crust near the very bottom of the Martian world. To rest there would be to sit at one of the lowest places on an entire planet, with the whole world rising away above you on every side, the rim of the canyon climbing toward a sky that is itself far below the heights of the distant volcanoes. There is a strange finality in that. The thought of resting at one of the deepest points of a whole world, settled into the very floor of its greatest hollow, with nowhere lower nearby to go. Across that silent, frozen, lifeless place, the small pale sun crosses the sky each day, smaller and dimmer than the sun, you know, casting its gentle light into the great trough. Mars lies farther from the sun than the Earth, and so its sun hangs smaller in the sky, a paler and more distant disk, its light softer and cooler than the bright sun of our own world. Into the canyon that soft light falls, warming the red rock a little in the brightest hours, glinting on the dust and the frost, sinking toward the rim each evening to set in its strange blue glow. The canyon has known that small pale sun crossing its sky for billions of years, the same faint light pouring slowly down its walls morning after morning, a quiet and faithful sun keeping its long watch over the great chasm. And as that gentle image settles over you, you may feel your own thoughts growing soft and dim, the day's brightness fading, a quiet dusk gathering gently behind your eyes. The single day upon Mars is gentle and familiar in its length, only a little longer than a day of our own, so that the rhythm of light and dark over the canyon would feel almost like home. The planet turns once upon itself in a span just slightly greater than a single earthly day, the sun rising and crossing and setting over the great trough in a cycle nearly the same as the one your own body knows. There is something quietly comforting in that for all the strangeness of Mars, its day keeps almost the same measure as ours, the canyon waking and darkening to a rhythm a human heart could easily settle into, the long red trough passing from dawn to dusk and back again in a span scarcely longer than the turning of our own familiar world. The year upon Mars, by contrast, is far longer than our own, nearly twice the length, so that each season lingers across a great and unhurried span. Because the planet travels a wider and slower path around the sun, its journey through a single year takes almost 2 of ours to complete, and so its seasons stretch out long and even, each winter and each spring enduring across many months of the kind we know. The canyon passes through these long seasons gradually, its frosts gathering and fading, its dust storms rising and settling, its slopes darkening and clearing, all across a year that takes nearly twice as long as ours to turn. There is a deep patience even in the calendar of Mars, the great trough breathing through seasons that linger and unfold at an unhurried pace, time itself running gentler and longer upon that distant world. The colours of the canyon shift and deepen with the light, the red rock glowing warm in the low sun and cooling to shadow as the day declines. In the bright hours, the walls of Valles Marineris shine in shades of rust and ochre and pale gold, the layered stone catching the small sun's light along its every ridge, and as the day wanes, the colours deepen toward crimson and umber and the soft violet of shadow, the canyon sinking into the tones of dusk. It is a place painted in the warm colours of a desert sunset held nearly all day long, the red of the rock and the tan of the sky blending in gentle harmony, the whole trough glowing in the muted, restful hues of an autumn evening. There is a deep calm in those colours, the warm red earth and the soft tan sky, the restful palette of a quiet world at rest. Because the canyon is so deep, The high rim drinks the first and the last of each day's light, while the floor still rests in shadow, the highest cliffs glowing softly when all below lies dim. At dawn, the topmost edges of the walls catch the rising sun and warm to a faint gold long before the light can reach the depths, and at dusk those same high rims hold the final glow when the floor has already sunk into the gathering dark. To watch the canyon through a day would be to see the light climb down its walls in the morning and back up them at evening, the rim forever the first to wake and the last to dim, the floor sheltered longest in the soft blue shade. There is a deep tenderness in that, the high stone catching the gentlest light of dawn and dusk while the deep floor rests in shadow, the canyon greeting and bidding farewell to the sun along its lofty edges while its depths lie wrapped in a longer, deeper calm. Even the dust that fills the air and coats the canyon plays its quiet part in the beauty of the place, softening the light and tinting the sky and settling over the bare red rock. The fine red dust of Mars is everywhere, suspended in the thin air, blown by the faint winds, settling upon every surface, and it is this dust that lends the sky its butterscotch hue, and the sunset its strange blue glow, and the whole world its soft and ruddy colour. The dust drifts down upon the canyon floor in a slow and ceaseless rain, gathering in the still places, softening the edges of the rock, building over ages into the very layers that the cliffs expose. It is a quiet and ceaseless thing, this dust, forever drifting and settling, tinting the light and colouring the world, the soft red breath of a planet forever painting its own great canyon in the softest of hues. The wind that carries that dust, though faint in the thin air, can on rare occasions rise into great storms that sweep across the whole planet, veiling even the canyon in haze. Most of the time the Martian wind is gentle, a soft and quiet stirring of the thin air, but now and then, across the turning of the years, the winds gather and lift the dust higher and higher until a great storm spreads across the entire globe, the same kind of storm that hid the planet when the first orbiter arrived. In such times even the great canyon is veiled, its walls and floor lost in a drifting red haze, the whole world wrapped in dust until the storm at last subsides and the dust settles and the canyon emerges once more into the clear. These great storms are rare and grand, gathering and fading across the long Martian seasons, a rare and occasional breathing of dust across the face of the world. When such a storm clears, the canyon emerges unchanged, for it is far too vast and too ancient to be altered by any passing weather, enduring beyond every storm and season. The dust may settle a little differently, the dunes may shift a few grains, the frost may come and go, but the great chasm itself stands as it has stood for billions of years, its towering walls and deep troughs unmoved by any storm that sweeps across the planet. There is a deep steadiness in that, a sense of something so vast and so old that the weather of a whole world passes over it like a breath, leaving it essentially unchanged, the canyon abiding through every storm and calm alike, steadfast and enduring beneath the shifting moods of the Martian sky. Whatever passes overhead, the great trough remains, faithful and still, exactly as it has been since the deep antiquity of the world. The canyon's great size means that it spans a remarkable range of landscapes within its own length, from the tangled labyrinth of its western end to the flood-carved chaos of its east. To travel its length would be to pass through many different worlds within the single world of the canyon, the fractured maze of intersecting troughs in the west, the long parallel chasms of the central reaches, the vast open basin of its widest heart, the broken chaotic terrain at its eastern mouth, the dry channels of the old floods running away to the north. Each region wears its own character, its own forms and moods, and yet all are bound together into the single great system of Valles Marineris, a canyon so large that it contains, within itself, a whole geography of different lands, each flowing into the next across the long miles of the silent red expanse. There is a beauty too in the sheer order that underlies the canyon's apparent wildness, the way its great chasms align along the strains of the planet's crust. For all that Valles Marineris seems a chaos of troughs and cliffs, its main chasms run in a clear and orderly direction, stretched along the lines of stress that radiated out from the swelling of the great volcanic bulge. The canyon follows the architecture of the planet's strain, its troughs aligned with the cracks that the rising land opened in the crust, a great and ordered structure underlying the seeming wildness of the chasm. To recognize this is to perceive the canyon as a thing of deep geometry, its great form the visible expression of forces that worked upon the whole planet, the strain of a world made legible in the alignment of its greatest wound. The walls of the canyon, where they are freshest, reveal rock that has lain hidden since the planet's youth, ancient stone exposed for the first time when the chasm tore open. In cutting kilometers down into the crust, Valles Marineris has brought to the surface rock that formed in the deep antiquity of Mars and then lay buried for ages, only now laid bare in the canyon walls, fresh to the thin air and the small sun's light. To touch such rock were a traveller ever to stand at the foot of those cliffs would be to touch material that had waited in darkness since before the oldest events of Earth's own history, raised into the light by the tearing of a world. The canyon is, in this way, a window into the buried depths of the planet, a place where the hidden interior of Mars is open to the sky. Within the canyon there may even lie caves and hollows, dark openings in the rock where the walls have collapsed, or where ancient lava once flowed, sheltered places hidden in the cliffs. Across Mars, in volcanic regions, there are known to be caves and pits and lava tubes, hollow passages left where molten rock once ran and drained away, and within the walls and floor of Valles Marineris, such hidden hollows may also wait, dark and sheltered, sealed away from the harsh surface above. Such caves, were they found, would be places of deep stillness and shelter, refuges from the radiation and the cold and the dust of the open surface, quiet hollows in the rock where the deep canyon keeps its darkest and most secret spaces. There is something deeply restful in the thought of such places, sheltered hollows in the depths of the great chasm, dark and still and utterly silent. For all that scientists long to send a rover or a lander down into the canyon, the very grandeur of the place makes it a difficult and daring destination. To set a craft safely upon the floor of Valles Marineris would mean threading it down between towering walls, through the swirling winds that gather in the depths, onto a floor strewn with the rubble of ancient landslides, a far harder task than landing upon the open and easy plains where machines have touched down before. And so, for now, the canyon floor remains untrodden even by our robots, glimpsed only from above, its depths awaiting some future mission bold enough to descend into them. There is a strange allure in that, a place so grand that it has kept even our hardy machines at the rim, waiting still for the day when something will at last come gently to rest upon its silent floor. The rocks of the canyon are so rich a record of the planet's wet and ancient past that some who plan the exploration of Mars dream of carrying pieces of them home, of one day returning a fragment of this place to the Earth. To hold in a laboratory a sample of the layered stone of Valles Marineris, the salts and clays that water left behind, would be to read the canyon's history in ways no instrument flung across space can manage, to question the very rock at leisure about the water and the warmth and the long ages it remembers. Such a homecoming of Martian stone lies in the future still, a difficult and distant hope. But the canyon stands high among the places where the past of Mars is written most plainly, a great open book whose pages some future hand may one day gather and carry across the gulf to read at home beneath our own familiar sky. The exploration of the canyon, carried out entirely from afar by orbiting machines, is itself a quiet marvel of patience and ingenuity, a knowledge gathered across an enormous gulf. No human foot has ever touched the floor of Valles Marineris, and no rover has yet rolled across its depths, and yet we know the canyon in extraordinary detail, mapped and measured and photographed by a long succession of orbiters circling far overhead. Everything we know of this place has been read from images and instruments flung across millions of kilometers of space. The canyon revealed to us not by touch, but by careful observation, its secrets gathered grain by grain across the decades by machines that have never landed. There is a deep gentleness in that way of knowing, learning the shape and story of a distant canyon entirely through careful looking, receiving its faint light and faint signals across the dark and building from them a whole understanding. That steady watching continues still, and will continue, as new machines are sent to circle Mars and gaze down into the Great Canyon with ever sharper eyes. Each new orbiter sees a little more clearly than the last, mapping the canyon in finer detail, sensing its minerals and its hidden water, photographing its walls and floor with growing precision, adding always to the long and deepening portrait of the chasm. And someday perhaps a rover or even a human explorer may at last descend into the depths of Valles Marineris and walk upon its ancient floor, beneath its towering walls, seeing with living eyes what only machines have glimpsed so far. The long exploration of the canyon is far from finished, a slow and unfolding endeavour that reaches on into a future we cannot yet see, the great chasm still giving up its secrets to those who watch and wonder. Part of how the canyon grew so deep may lie in the quiet withdrawal of ice and water from beneath the ground, the foundation slowly emptying away until the surface sagged and sank into the hollow left behind. Where great stores of ice or water once lay locked beneath the surface, their slow melting or escape may have left the ground above unsupported, sagging and falling inward, deepening and widening the troughs as the land sank into the emptied space below. In this gentle reckoning, the canyon owes some of its depth not only to the tearing of the crust, but to the silent vanishing of buried water, the ground subsiding as its hidden ice withdrew, the chasm sinking lower as the planet quietly lost the water that once held its surface up. It is a soft and gradual kind of collapse, a deepening born of absence, the land settling slowly into the space where water used to be. The canyon lies open too, beneath a sky unguarded by any global magnetic shield, for Mars long ago lost the protecting field that the Earth still keeps. In its youth, the planet may have had a magnetic shield much like our own, woven by the stirring of its molten heart, but as Mars cooled and its inner fires grew still, that field faded and was lost, leaving the surface exposed to the full reach of the sun's wind and the radiation of deep space. Faint traces of that ancient field still linger, frozen into some of the planet's oldest rocks, a magnetic memory of a vanished shield, and such traces may rest within the deep walls of the canyon as well. To know that Mars once held a shield and then let it go is to glimpse another chapter of the planet's long quieting, the same cooling that stilled its volcanoes and drew away its water, also letting fall the invisible shelter that once wrapped the world. For all that we have learned, the canyon still holds its mysteries, questions that linger unanswered in its depths, soft riddles resting in the red rock. How exactly the great landslides ran so far, whether lakes truly filled the troughs, and for how long, how the layered mounds were built, and by what slow process, whether life ever stirred in the early water, how much water still hides beneath the floor, all of these remain open questions gently unresolved. The more closely we study the canyon, the more questions it quietly offers in return, its mysteries renewed rather than exhausted by our looking. A vast and unhurried chasm that will likely never be fully understood. And there is a deep comfort in that, the knowledge that the canyon keeps its secrets still, that wonder is not used up by knowledge but endlessly renewed, that this great trough on another world will go on surprising us for as long as we watch. The canyon's place in the imagination of those who dream of Mars is a special one, for it's among the most famous and beloved features of the whole planet, a wonder that has stirred the human mind for half a century. Ever since its first revealing through the clearing dust, Valles Marineris has captured the imagination as the grandest canyon known to exist, a feature so vast and so dramatic that it has become a symbol of Mars itself, of the planet's strange grandeur and its deep and ancient past. To picture Mars is, for many, to picture this great red chasm running across the world, and the canyon has appeared in countless images and dreams and stories of the red planet, a touchstone of human wonder about that distant world. There is a warm fellowship in that, the knowledge that this canyon has stirred the wonder of so many, a great shared marvel held in common across the years. To give its length a shape the mind can hold, consider that if this single canyon were laid down across the United States, it would reach very nearly from one ocean to the other. Stretched over that broad land, the western end of the chasm would open somewhere near the Pacific coast, and its eastern reaches would run on and on, across deserts and plains and mountains and rivers, until they came at last to the shores of the Atlantic on the far side of the continent. The whole breadth of a nation, all its states strung from sea to sea, would fit within the span of this one Martian trough. It is a comparison that brings the canyon's scale down to earth. The thought of a chasm so long that it would cross an entire continent, swallowing within its length a journey that takes days to fly and weeks to drive across our own familiar world. It is humbling too to remember that this colossal feature is so large that early watchers, peering through their telescopes long ago, could just make out its faint shadow as a dusky streak upon the little disk of Mars. In the days before any machine had flown to the planet, careful observers sketched the markings they saw upon that distant ruddy point, dark patches and faint lines whose true nature they could only guess at. And among those shadowy markings lay the Great Canyon, though no one then could know what it was. They saw it without understanding it, this immense chasm reduced by distance to a faint smudge on a tiny globe, its grandeur utterly hidden behind the vast gulf of space. There is a gentle wonder in that, the thought that human eyes had glimpsed the shadow of this mightiest of all chasms long before anyone knew that a canyon was what they had glimpsed at all. If the largest canyon of our own world is the truest measure the Earth can offer, then it is worth dwelling a little longer on just how completely Valles Marineris overshadows it. The Grand Canyon of Arizona was carved bit by a single river, cutting down through rock across millions of years, and it remains one of the great wonders of our planet, a gorge that draws travellers from every corner of the Earth to stand humbled at its edge. Yet that entire celebrated canyon, with all its branching side gorges and all its layered cliffs, would be lost within a single chasm of the Martian system, a minor notch in one wall scarcely worth a second glance beside the whole. Where the earthly canyon descends a kilometre or so, the Martian troughs plunge many kilometres down. Where ours runs a few hundred kilometres, the Martian system runs thousands. To hold the two side by side in the mind is to feel the gentle vertigo of true scale, the familiar wonder of our own world dwindling to a footnote beside the vast red original on Mars. The fine cameras carried by the orbiters of recent years have brought the canyon so close that individual boulders upon its floor can now be seen, scattered across the great expanse like grains upon a vast red shore. From hundreds of kilometres overhead, these tireless eyes can pick out features only metres across, resolving the canyon in such exquisite detail that the tumbled debris of old landslides, the ripples of wind-blown sand, and the dark streaks upon the slopes all stand revealed. To pore over such images is to feel almost as though one were drifting low above the canyon floor, gazing down at the strewn boulders and the layered cliffs and the long dunes, every detail crisp in the thin, clear air. The whole chasm, once a mere smudge upon a distant disk, has been drawn so near by these careful machines that its very stones can be counted, a wonder of careful looking across an enormous gulf. When those images are gathered in colours beyond the reach of the eye and then brought into view, the canyon blooms into a surprising richness of hues, the different rocks and minerals shining in shades the bare eye would never catch. Where a simple glance sees only red and rust and shadow, these deeper images reveal pale yellows and soft greens and cool blues scattered across the floor and walls, each tint marking a different kind of stone, a different mineral, a different chapter of the canyon's history. The salts glow one colour, the clays another, the iron-rich rocks another still, so that the whole chasm, seen in this enriched light, becomes a soft tapestry of subtle shades, a map of its own composition painted across the troughs. To behold the canyon so is to see past its plain red surface into the hidden variety beneath, the great trough revealing, in colours drawn out by sensitive instruments, just how many different stones and how many different stories it holds. The canyon also lays open, in its great length, the meeting place of different ages and different lands, where the ancient cratered highlands give way to the younger plains. Mars is a world of two halves, its southern reaches old and rough and heavily marked by the impacts of ages past, its northern lowlands smoother and younger and lying lower, and the great canyon stretches across the borderland where these two great realms approach one another. To trace its length is to pass along a seam in the planet itself, the chasm cutting through the boundary between the old high country and the low young plains, exposing in its walls the layered record of both. There is a deep grandeur in that, the canyon not only a wound in the crust but a window upon the planet's two great faces at once, the ancient and the younger ground laid open side by side in the banded stone of its cliffs. Upon certain slopes within the canyon, with the warming of the seasons, there appear long dark streaks that lengthen down the walls and then fade as the cold returns. These narrow markings creep downhill during the warmer times of the Martian year, darkening the slopes in slender fingers, only to vanish again as the season cools, returning once more when the warmth comes back around. What exactly draws them down the slopes remains a gentle question, whether some trickle of briny water, or the dry flowing of loosened sand, or some quiet mingling of the two, but their slow seasonal coming and going lends the canyon walls a faint and living rhythm, a soft seasonal breathing written in darkening lines down the bare red stone. Even here, in this still and frozen place, something stirs with the turning of the year, slopes that darken and fade in time with the distant sun. Across the floor of the canyon, in the warmer hours, there move slender whirlwinds of dust, tall spinning columns that wander silently across the red expanse. These dust devils form when the small sun warms the canyon floor and the heated air rises and begins to spin, gathering up the fine red dust into towering twisting columns that drift across the ground, sometimes climbing far higher than any such whirlwind on the earth. They roam the canyon floor in their silent hundreds, lifting dust into the thin air, scouring faint tracks across the surface as they pass, the only swift and dancing things in all that vast and unmoving stillness. To imagine standing in the canyon and watching one of these tall, quiet whirlwinds drift past, spinning its column of dust toward the tan sky, is to glimpse a strange and gentle motion in the heart of the silence, a brief dance of dust beneath the towering walls. The air at the bottom of the canyon, though denser than upon the plains above, is still so thin that it would offer no breath at all to a traveller, thinner by far than the air upon the highest mountains of the earth. Even gathered into the deepest trough, the Martian atmosphere presses with only a tiny fraction of the weight that our own air lays upon us at sea level, a pressure so slight that water exposed to it would boil away even while cold. And yet that faint extra thickness, pooled into the depths, is precious on a world so starved of air, the densest breath the planet can offer anywhere upon its surface, gathered into the lowest hollows of its greatest canyon. To dwell upon that is to feel both the harshness and the gentleness of the place at once, a canyon whose very depth hoards what little air the world still holds, sheltering it in the deep the way a valley shelters mist. The canyon is so vast that it would take in not merely cities or countries but whole mountain ranges within its depths and its length, swallowing them entire. Were the greatest ranges of the earth set down within Valles Marineris, their loftiest peaks would not reach the rim, their long chains would be lost along the floor, their whole grandeur diminished to a scattering of hills within the immensity of the chasm. The canyon could hold ranges within it, the way a great hall might hold a few pieces of furniture, the mountains dwindling to small things upon its floor, dwarfed by the towering walls and the wide reach of the troughs. To imagine entire mountain ranges lying lost within the canyon their peaks falling short of the rim, is to feel once more the true and humbling scale of the place, a hollow vast enough to swallow the grandest heights our own world can raise. What makes that scale stranger still is that Mars itself is a small world, far smaller than the Earth, barely more than half our planet's width, and yet it holds this greatest of all canyons upon its modest globe. One might expect the largest features to belong to the largest worlds, and yet here is a little planet smaller and lighter than our own, wearing across its face a chasm that no canyon on the much greater Earth can begin to rival. The very smallness of Mars is part of why the canyon could grow so vast, its rigid, unmoving crust and its gentle gravity allowing the rift to open and the walls to stand where a larger, more restless world would never permit it. There is a quiet lesson in that, the grandest of canyons belonging not to the grandest of worlds, but to a small and quiet one, the little red planet holding a wonder out of all proportion to its size. Knowledge of the canyon has been gathered not by one machine but by a long and faithful succession of them, orbiter after orbiter across the decades, each adding its own careful share. After the first little craft revealed the chasm, others followed, mapping its shape, charting the heights of its walls, reading the chemistry of its rocks, and photographing its cliffs and floor in ever finer detail, so that our picture of the canyon has deepened steadily year upon year. Each new machine has built upon the work of those before it, a long relay of robotic eyes circling far overhead, the whole long endeavour a lasting testament to human persistence, our understanding of the canyon assembled across half a century by craft that have never once landed upon its floor. The canyon we know today is the gift of that long and faithful watching, gathered grain by grain from across the dark. And as it turns out, the canyon may have grown not all at once, but across great spans of time, widening and deepening over many ages rather than in a single tearing. The crust first split along these lines in the deep antiquity of the planet, but the canyon went on changing long afterward, its walls collapsing, its floor subsiding, water and wind and slow erosion working upon it across billions of years, so that the chasm we see is the sum of an enormously long history, rather than a single event. The tearing began it, but the ages finished it, shaping and widening the great trough across stretches of time too long for any mind to truly hold. To grasp this is to behold the canyon not as a wound made in a moment, but as one made and remade across the whole long life of a world, a slow masterpiece of geology written across billions of uncounted years. There is a final stillness to consider in this great chasm, a quality of profound and ancient rest that lies over the whole of it, undisturbed across the billions of years. Nothing hurries in Valles Marineris. The dunes creep grain by grain, the walls crumble slab by slab across the ages, the frost comes and goes with the slow turning of the long Martian year, and over it all the small pale sun crosses the sky in its gentle, faithful round. It is a place of the deepest patience, a wound changing so gradually that to any human gaze it appears utterly motionless and eternal, a chasm resting in a silence and a stillness that reach back to the youth of the world. To hold that stillness in the mind is to feel one's own thoughts grow quiet and slow, settling into the same deep and patient rest, the same ancient calm that lies over the great red trough beneath the distant stars. And here, at the last, is the gentlest wonder this great canyon holds, the quiet truth folded into the heart of all its scale and silence. Picture it once more in the stillness of your mind, that vast dark slash across the red face of a distant world, 4,000 kilometers long, kilometers deep, so wide it hides its own far wall behind the curve of a planet. It is a wound torn open by the swelling of a world, a rift where the crust of Mars was pulled apart in the deep antiquity of time. It is a museum of ancient water, its walls and floor strewn with the salts and clays and layered beds that liquid left behind, the memory of vanished rivers and lakes written into its stone. It is a refuge still, hiding water frozen in its depths, sheltering beneath its towering walls, and it has lain there, vast and silent and patient, since long before there were any eyes to see it. And the gentlest secret of all is this, that you, lying here in the warm dark, are made of the very same kinds of substances that built that distant canyon, the same rock-forming elements, the same water, the same ancient atoms scattered through every world. The iron that reddens the canyon stone is kin to the iron that colours your own blood. The water hidden in its depths is the same water that fills your body and your breath. The very atoms that make the great trough on Mars were forged in the same ancient stars, scattered through the same great cloud that gave rise to the earth and to the sea and to you. So when you picture that canyon on its distant world, something very old within you is gazing upon something very old out there. Two arrangements of the same ancient matter, briefly aware of one another across an unthinkable gulf of space. There is nothing you need to do with this, nothing to keep or carry into the morning. It is enough tonight simply to have felt it for a single quiet moment, the gentle kinship between yourself and a canyon on another world, the soft truth that you belong to the same vast and ancient cosmos that shaped the great red chasm, the same long geology, the same scattered atoms, the same long and patient story. You are a small, warm, living part of it all, resting now, exactly where you're meant to be. The journey along the Great Canyon of Mars is complete now, and you may set all of it gently down. There is nothing more to follow, nothing more to learn, nothing more the night asks of you. And if you're still here, drifting softly in the dark, another quiet journey is already waiting for you, there on the screen whenever you wish it, or never at all. It will keep quietly for as long as you like. There is no need to reach for it now. It will simply be there, the way the canyon is always there, asking nothing, holding its quiet presence whenever you choose to return. For now, let everything you have heard tonight grow distant and dim. Let the numbers fade, let the great size soften, let the vast red trough slip slowly back into the wide and peaceful dark, where it will go on resting without any need of your watching. You do not have to hold on to a single thing. Let your breath grow slow and easy. Let it rise and fall and rise again, all on its own. Feel how heavy and warm the body has become. Feel how the bed holds you, how the dark wraps softly around you, how safe and quiet this moment is. There is nowhere to go. There is nothing to do. There is only this gentle settling, this slow letting go, this quiet drift downward into rest. The canyon is silent, the night is deep, and you are held. Let your thoughts grow quiet now. Let them dim one by one, like stars softly fading at the edge of dawn. Rest now, let go, sink slowly into sleep, and now 101 wonders are resting with you. Sleep now. Good night.